at Dundalk last night, and I'm a lapsed Athlone Town supporter as well, and that's been a tough week, obviously, on that front too. But it did have me thinking last night that I've enjoyed watching Dundalk an awful lot over the last number of weeks, and I wanted more. Like, it's too sporadic, isn't it? Like, how often do we see? There's not been many Irish teams that are qualified for that level of Europe, and I really want to see more of it. And like I've seen, it struck me last night that I've seen probably more Dundalk on the tally this year than I've seen of the Republic of Ireland, which I think would be true of most sports fans as well. So sports fans. So that was really what I was thinking on, and then I got thinking about how could we put in place a situation where we could get more of this on our TVs, and you could have more regular European football for Irish teams. It's not straightforward. I probably should start off by saying that. Go on.
No, it's just so you've basically devised a plan to ensure that Dundalk qualify for the Europa League every year, that we have an Irish team in the Europa League every year. What's the end game here to ensure that we have eyeballs on our screens on a Thursday night every year, but there's an Irish team playing every single year?
Yeah, and it can't be one team is the thing, because I think it falls flat there straight away. And listen, I'm going to start off by saying it's a pretty radical way of looking at this thing, so I'm going to put that marker down straight away. But there are a few key principles of it own right. Firstly, that the league itself would have to agree, first of all, what success actually looks like for teams emerging out of the League of Ireland. Qualification for and playing in Europe, in my view, should be chief amongst it. And the league then would become a secondary priority, and that would just have to be a fundamental core principle of the agreed starting blocks. Strong arguments, obviously, for both, I'm sure, and but it's a founding stone of any discussion around this. If the league don't buy that, then this idea in itself is dead, right? So being mindful that the league is currently and has been run, obviously, by private interests as well, this proposal is to try and wrestle some of the control back into the arms of the league itself, that at the minute it's obviously outsourced to private commercial business people or private owners, and the league has less of an ownership of it, in my view, than it should do. So this helps address some of that as well. Another founding principle, and essentially the core of this idea on, is that you'd have a nominated team in a cycle of agreed number of years. So let's for discussion's sake here, every 3 years in this cycle, you have a nominated team, and that's not a random nomination. You get that nomination on merit, right? So the qualification to be nominated for that cycle works on a coefficient point system, and that's based on season after season. You get cumulative points, and you, depending on where you finish on the table, and other factors if it's decided that way. But if you're on top of that table, then you are that nominated team, unless that you've been that nominated team in any of the previous 3 cycles, in which case the nomination goes to the next team down, and so on. And that's just the thing that allows it to be a meritocracy, and it allows a system where it's not always in the gift of the top 2 teams of the country. It has to be that bigger pot of possible teams that can enter. And the key is to make sure that when you then become that eligible team, that you're in the best position to take it. So it's all about timing, and timing your run correctly. And the other thing is that you might only, obviously, in that context, finish second in the league, but still secure the nomination. And the other aspect of that then is that some years that's going to mean it's a team who don't automatically qualify for the Champions League, i.e. the team who win the league won't be the nominated team. And so in that instance, you have to ensure that you put a system in where the nominated team can't come from below Europa League qualification, let's say. At the minute, that's third in the table, with the 4th place going to the FAI Cup. So I'd also be proposing that 4th place is taken away from the FAI Cup winners and just given to 4th place in the league to help best facilitate this and keep it as that meritocracy. It means, of course, then there's room for any team in the country to get their coefficient high enough over a number of years. You put a good enough business plan in place and be in a position to pierce that top 4 and get yourself in the mix for it. Coefficient also adds that extra level of intrigue and talkability, and another reason for teams to go hell for leather towards the end of the season, because even though positions might be roughly decided, it still helps your coefficient to try and win as many games as you can, even though the season might be over. So the other thing is that you have a situation at Dundalk at the minute. It's been spoken about over the last couple of weeks. You've the likes of Sean Hoare and Gannon possibly leaving Dundalk at the end of the season, and maybe more as well. And this is something that happens on a fairly regular basis. It would probably still happen, but it just happens at the minute in such an unstructured way that I think it's a blight on the development of the league's best team, and it can result, it won't in Dundalk's case, but it can result in that boom-bust culture of teams dominating leagues until ultimately they run out of money. And we've seen the evidence of this over the last 20 years. They run out of money our players get better offers elsewhere, and off they go. And so the proposal would be to do away with the unstructured nature of that and try and put some structure around it in terms of bringing the best players into that nominated team.
So
part of the package for the nominated team obviously would have to be financial investment, and that money would come from increased TV coverage and rights. Suddenly there'd be a bigger interest in who that nominated team would be. Consistent flow of European money obviously is key to this. So the money that comes in, like Dundalk have done obviously this year, and also that raise all boats. And obviously the objective of the plan would obviously be in relation to merchandise. Attendances should all be up as well, you would expect, as part of all this.
Well, sorry, so just to clarify here, you're talking about a nominated team from the League of Ireland, and this nominated team, how is that decided? Where does that team come from? Where are they based? Who are the nominated team?
It's a different team every 3-year cycle, right? So let's say at the minute that's Dundalk, right? Their coefficient, for discussion's sake, I don't know what it would look like over the last 3 or 4 years, but their coefficient will be higher than everybody else's. So they get that nomination for the next 3 years, and they get that bank of backing from the league, essentially. And then once their 3-year cycle is done, then that cycle is up, and then it goes back to the coefficient table. So let's say over that period of time, Bohemians have gone on to win the league over the previous 2 years. They're obviously going to be in the best position to be that nominated team for the next 3 years. So Dundalk at that point have to take a back seat.
But what if they've won the league? What if Dundalk have won the league and they've won like 4 or 5 titles in a row? They're just going to be told that you can't partake in Europe.
Exactly. So no, not that they can't partake in Europe, not at all, but that they're not going to be this nominated team. So there will be. So that's what I was saying earlier. So there will be 4. There's obviously at the minute 4 positions for Europe from the League of Ireland. 1, the winners go into the Champions League. I don't think that there's anything that ultimately this proposal will be able to do to change that. I think ultimately if you end up winning the League of Ireland, you have to get the reward going into the Champions League, whether you're the nominated team or not. But then the 3 below that. So it's boxed off at the top 4 teams, and one of those 4 teams, depending on what area of the cycle we're in, will end up going. Will end up going into. They'll all go into Europe anyway, but one of them becomes the nominated team.
So they just get extra backing. They become so. Whatever the investment is, and that's probably a conversation for another day. This is just an idea this morning. Wherever that investment is coming from, it is going to get funneled into this nominated team, and all of the FAI's resources will go into one team.
No. So the money is coming from the money that they bring in from Europe, like millions of euro in a way that, and this is why I say we should have a serious conversation about whether the League of Ireland is a priority or Europe is a priority, based on the millions of euro that will come in for Dundalk this year that you just can't replicate within the League of Ireland. The evidence is that is there over the last number of years. So that's where the money comes from, and it doesn't just all go to the nominated team. They would have to accept as part of this that actually there's some sort of a split that goes to help raise all boats. Otherwise it is only one team. Otherwise, if it's Dundalk at the minute, they get all the money and they're uncatchable at some point 3 years later. So there has to be some sort of equity of feeding the money around. But go on.
Why do we have one nominated team when you can potentially invest in grassroots, ensure that the League of Ireland is going in a better direction than the direction it's been going in for the last decade and a half to 2 decades, encouraging a bit of foreign investment into the League of Ireland clubs and cultivating the direction in which a club like Dundalk is going towards? What's the end game here from your point of view?
The main reason for that, and there's a couple more points I want to touch on here in relation to the plan, because obviously I want to make it as watertight as I can on for our viewers. The main point of that is it just hasn't worked, right? So the objective of this is to it's a little bit of the Dundalk business plan. Get into Europe as much as you can and bring in the money, except for it's the league itself taking ownership of it rather than private entities.
I see what you're saying, and then after your 4-year cycle or whatever it's going to be as the team that is being cultivated by the League of Ireland, then it moves on to another team, and you'd hope that the legacy of that investment and that dedication and that care is going to lead to further results. Is that essentially? Yeah,
it's not even to do with the legacy around that one team. It's just you're at that point talking about bringing in 3, 4, 5 million euro every year into the League of Ireland in a way that money just doesn't exist at the minute. Like, there's a sustainability about it that's not always a handout approach. Like, what can the government give us? This is actually the league trying to help itself, and it's not like a one runaway team. Like I said, that boom bust culture that's been there over the last number of years.
But it sounds like it could become a runaway team. It sounds like that you're paying special attention to one particular element of the League of Ireland, and everything else could get left behind. That's the danger here. It also sounds quite confusing, I'm not going to lie.
I mean, you weren't paying attention to that. You've asked some questions there that have demonstrated on.
You didn't demonstrate them that clearly, because I was listening very carefully, and you haven't made it abundantly clear.
let me just cover off some of these other points, right? So the team that gets nominated can afford at that point because they're getting some financial investment to bring in. I mentioned the unstructured natures of players wandering around the league, but they at that point can bring in the best 4 or 5 players in the country. And also post Brexit, obviously some conversation about that this week about some exceptional young talent from an under-18 point of view. Where do those players go? So could we? Instead of those players going to the UK, the nominated club would get the pick of the best young talent in maybe some sort of a draft pick, which would obviously also offer benefits to other clubs as well. Like it's a Celtic Rangers system on, right? But by design of the league and only one team. And I should say that 2 other major benefits as well would be the quality of player that's coming from the League of Ireland at that point would also feed into the national team. So there is that offshoot. And then suddenly a higher standard of player as well, that like the revenue stream that's coming from those younger players who will at some point go off to the Premier League, let's say, or to other European leagues at 19 or 20. They're going to get a higher premium for those players now as opposed to the pittance that exists at the minute.
Can I just ask one last question, Adrian? Like as an Athlone Town fan, like this could be to the detriment of clubs that aren't in contention for the top 4 or 5 places in the League of Ireland Premier Division. What happens to them?
Well, it's a misnomer to think that there are 30 clubs that are in the running for the Premier Division for the League of Ireland anyway to begin with. Like, what is it in any given year on is probably about 3 teams that have the capacity to actually win it. So
but
I don't think
it's not just about winning it. It's about their very existence. It's about them being cared about as much as Dundalk and St. Pat's and Shamrock Rovers. Like, what is the? It just seems that you are shoehorning off the very top clubs, the elite in the League of Ireland Premier Division, and everybody else gets a little bit forgotten about.
Well, yeah, so that isn't the whole idea. If you're bringing in, for discussion's sake, let's say €5 million every year because of guaranteed European football in terms of getting to this level, this stage of Europe, and you have the structures in place to funnel that money outside of just the nominated club, well, then that's your opportunity. And also, like I said, there are other things there, like the post-Brexit situation with young players that are there with a draft system. The reality is for a club like Athlone Town, it's barely surviving anyway. It is barely, they're barely managed to be able to put a team on the pitch to get thumped 11-0 by a team who aren't going to win the League of Ireland this year. So that's the reality anyway. But it's in bother. It's in serious bother anyway. So I would suggest that a plan like this would actually be should be of benefit. It needs to be structured in a way that's of benefit to clubs like Athlone Town.
It is a format that you probably couldn't write down on the back of an envelope, and Johnny Kennedy's been in touch to say it sounds as confusing as the Kerry Championship, which is a black mark against the simplicity of what you just brought to the table. But maybe we'll delve a little bit deeper into it later on. We'd love to hear your reaction to it. Tweet us at Off The Ball or comment on the YouTube stream as well. Phil Egan, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, how are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Let me tell you before that, let's tell you what's coming up this morning.